How many police you don't kill?
They kill am for Aja.
Well, he's no ordinary armed robber. Himself and his gang have been accused of killing several policemen and civilians.
I want you to first tell Nigerians who you be, what you they do for this anti-robbery squad, Lagos, where you dey so.
My name is Abiodun Egunjobi, alias Godogodo.
Okay, wetin be your work?
Robbery.
How many years ago you don start robbery? Wetin lead you into robbery? How you take start robbery? Where exactly you start the robbery from? Na for Lagos or from where?
The air in Lagos on that fateful Sunday morning of September 9th, 2012 was thick with humidity and the deceptive calm of a weekend. Residents of the Agege and Ifako-Ijaye axis went about their usual business, unaware that the devil himself had decided to pay them a visit, and he had not come alone. It was a day that would later be etched into the city's history as Black Sunday, a day when the thin blue line between order and anarchy was violently erased by the barrel of an AK-47. The chaos did not begin with a whimper, but with the deafening roar of automatic gunfire that shattered the peace of the early morning, sending market women abandoning their wares and churchgoers diving for cover behind concrete gutters. At the center of this maelstrom was a man whose very name had become a hushed curse on the lips of police officers across the Southwest, Abiodun Egunjobi, known to the underworld and the terrified populace simply as Godogodo. He did not look like a warlord. He looked like a scrap dealer, a nobody. But as he stepped out of his vehicle with an assault rifle in each hand, the terrifying reality became clear. This was not a man. This was a siege engine in human form, and he had come to collect a debt of blood. The operation was surgical in its brutality, a hallmark of Godogodo's tactical genius that had kept him a step ahead of the law for over a decade. Unlike the erratic drug-fueled frenzies of lesser criminals, Godogodo moved with the cold precision of a military commander, directing his men to blockade key exit points while he unleashed hell on the unsuspecting police patrols that dared to respond. The objective was not just robbery, it was a statement of dominance, a public execution of authority designed to remind the state that he, the one-eyed king, was the true ruler of Lagos. On that bloody day, the asphalt was stained crimson as his gang engaged multiple police teams simultaneously, their superior firepower overwhelming the officers who found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered in their own city. Witnesses would later recount the chilling sight of Godogodo standing amidst the carnage, his singular good eye scanning the horizon for fresh targets, completely unfazed by the sirens wailing in the distance, seemingly invincible as bullets whizzed past him. He moved with a terrifying calmness, reloading his weapons with practiced ease, his face a mask of stone that betrayed no emotion, no remorse, and absolutely no fear of the consequences that would surely follow such a brazen display of violence. By the time the smoke cleared and the gang vanished into the labyrinthine streets of Lagos, the toll was devastating. 2 police officers lay dead, their bodies riddled with bullets, and 7 innocent civilians had been cut down in the crossfire, collateral damage in Godogodo's war against the state. The media frenzy that followed was immediate and hysterical, with headlines screaming about the Lagos warlord and the cop killer who could strike anywhere, anytime, without retribution. The fear was palpable in every police station across the state. Officers began to patrol with trepidation, knowing that a ghost was hunting them, a predator who specifically targeted law enforcement to strip them of their weapons and their dignity. Black Sunday was not just a robbery, it was a humiliation of the entire Nigerian security apparatus, a slap in the face of the establishment that signaled the peak of Godogodo's reign, but unknown to him, it also signed his death warrant, for he had finally pushed the beast of the state too far, and the hunt was about to begin in earnest. The aftermath of Black Sunday set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to the most intense manhunt in Nigerian history, spearheaded by the relentless Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS. The brazen nature of the attack forced the police hierarchy to acknowledge that Godogodo was not merely a criminal problem, but a national security threat, requiring a response that matched his brutality. Inside the dark, smoky meeting rooms of the underworld, however, Godogodo's legend only grew. He was whispered about as a spirit, a man who used juju to deflect bullets and vanish into thin air, a myth that he carefully cultivated to ensure absolute loyalty from his men and absolute terror from his enemies. But myths are often fragile things, built on the shifting sands of fear and luck, and as the bodies piled up and the pressure mounted, the cracks in his empire began to show. He had become too big, too loud, and too dangerous to be ignored, and while he celebrated his victory in the shadows of his hideouts, counting the millions stolen and the rifles seized, the clock was ticking down, not just on his freedom, but on his life. The king of the underworld had roared his loudest, but the echo of that roar was summoning a storm that even he, with all his guns and charms, would not be able to weather. To understand the monster that terrorized the Southwest, one must first understand the man, Abiodun Egunjobi, and the crucible of pain and poverty that forged him. He was not born with a gun in his hand. He was born into the crushing anonymity of rural poverty in Ogun State, a place where dreams often died before they could even take their first breath. As a young man, he migrated to Lagos with the same wide-eyed hope that thousands of others carried, the hope of finding work, making money, and perhaps sending something back home to a mother who had known nothing but struggle. He started his life in the city not as a predator, but as prey, scraping out a meager living in the slums of Gatankoa, pushing trucks, scavenging for scrap metal, and trying to navigate the brutal hierarchy of the streets where the strong devoured the weak without a second thought. It was a hard life, devoid of glamour, but it was an honest one, until the city he tried to serve turned its back on him in the most violent way possible, teaching him the only lesson that mattered in the jungle: fairness is a lie told to keep the poor in line. The turning point, the moment Abiodun died and Godogodo was born, came during a raid that was all too common in the chaotic ecosystem of Lagos, a police sweep that made no distinction between criminal and citizen. He was arrested for wrongdoing, a vague charge often used to extort money from the destitute, and thrown into a cell where he languished for years without trial, surrounded by hardened criminals who became his tutors in the dark arts of the underworld. It was during this period of incarceration and subsequent encounters with the brutality of the streets that he lost one of his eyes, a physical disfigurement that would become his trademark and the source of his nickname. The loss of his eye was not just a physical injury, it was a psychic break, a moment where the light of empathy was extinguished and replaced by a cold, cyclopean hatred for the police and the society that allowed such injustice to flourish. He emerged from prison not rehabilitated, but radicalized by his own suffering, convinced that the only way to survive in a world that wanted to crush him was to become the crusher, to become something so terrifying that no one would ever dare to hurt him again. Upon his release, the transformation was absolute. The scrap dealer was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating strategist who viewed robbery not as a desperate act, but as a business operation that required discipline, planning, and ruthlessness. He famously abstained from the vices that plagued his contemporaries. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, and he didn't womanize recklessly, because he knew that a clouded mind was a dead mind. He began to recruit a gang, but unlike the chaotic mobs of area boys, his crew was run like a paramilitary unit, with strict rules of engagement and a clear hierarchy that placed him at the undisputed top. He utilized his knowledge of the scrap trade as the perfect cover, posing as a harmless fish seller or scrap merchant to scout banks and targets, blending into the background with his Ghana must-go bags, which concealed not fish but disassembled AK-47s. This ability to code switch, to move between the world of the ordinary civilian and the world of the violent criminal, was his greatest weapon, allowing him to live among the very people he terrorized, a wolf in sheep's clothing who could smile at a police officer at a checkpoint 1 minute and put a bullet in his head the next. The psychological profile of Godogodo is a chilling study in the duality of man. He was a sociopath who could justify mass murder as a necessary reaction to his own victimization. He rationalized his killing of police officers as a form of righteous vengeance, a payback for the eye he lost and the years of freedom stolen from him, telling his followers that the police were merely a rival gang with uniforms. This warped morality allowed him to commit atrocities with a clear conscience, sleeping soundly at night next to his wives and children who knew him only as a wealthy property owner and a loving father. He built mansions in Lagos, Ogun, and Ibadan, creating a facade of respectability that shielded his family from the bloody source of their comfort, effectively living two completely separate lives that never intersected. This compartmentalization was the key to his longevity. While other robbers were flashy and loud, drawing attention to themselves, Godogodo was a shadow, a whisper, a man who understood that true power is not just in the gun you hold, but in the silence you keep. And for years, that silence was his shield, protecting him from the consequences of his actions until the day the silence finally broke. The year 2013 marked a pivotal shift in the war against armed robbery in Lagos State, a year where the hunter finally became the hunted. The Lagos State Police Command, weary of burying their own and humiliated by the audacity of Godogodo's operations, decided that enough was enough, leading to a strategic overhaul of their approach to high-profile crime. The task of capturing the one-eyed assassin was handed to the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, a unit that had garnered a fearsome reputation of its own for its unorthodox and often brutal methods of combating violent crime. Under the command of Superintendent Abba Kayeri, a man who would later become a controversial figure but was then hailed as a super cop, the unit began a systematic dismantling of Godogodo's network. They understood that to catch a ghost, you don't chase the wind, you catch the people who anchor the ghost to the physical world, his suppliers, his informants, and his foot soldiers. The investigation was not a sprint, but a grueling marathon of surveillance, intelligence gathering, and high-pressure interrogations, moving from the dark alleys of Lagos Island to the dense forests of Ogun State, slowly tightening the noose around a neck that had never felt the weight of the law. The breakthrough did not come from a high-tech satellite or a drone strike. It came from the age-old police tactic of squeezing the weak to get to the strong. SARS operatives began picking up lower-level members of Godogodo's gang, men who lacked the iron discipline of their leader and were quick to crumble when faced with the terrifying reality of a SARS interrogation room. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. A suspect arrested in a botched robbery in Agehi provided a name. That name led to a safe house in Ikorodu. That safe house led to a trusted lieutenant who handled Godogodo's logistics. The police were relentless, operating on little sleep and fueled by the desperation to end the carnage. They discovered that Godogodo was not just a robber, he was a ghost who had mastered the art of camouflage. They learned that he traveled with a bag of fish or scrap metal to pass through police checkpoints unnoticed, smiling at the very officers he had sworn to kill, a level of psychological dominance that infuriated the investigators even more. Every piece of intel painted a picture of a man who was meticulously careful, a man who trusted no one completely, not even his wives, and who changed his sleeping location almost every night to stay ahead of the bullet that was surely coming for him. I want to pause the story here for a moment, because this is where the reality of crime gets complicated. The police were only able to get close to Godogodo because his own loyal men betrayed him to save their own skin. In the underworld, loyalty is often just a currency that is spent the moment survival is at stake. I want you to go to the comments section right now and answer this. Do you think there is ever true honor among thieves, or is betrayal inevitable when the police come knocking? If you were in their shoes, facing a life sentence or death, would you snitch on your boss to save yourself? Write loyalty or betrayal in the comments and tell me why. Let's see what you think. Now, back to the hunt. As the weeks turned to months, the net tightened significantly around the southwest. Godogodo, sensing the heat, retreated from Lagos. He knew that the city was too hot, the eyes of the state too focused. He moved his base of operations to Ibadan, the capital of Oyo State, a city known for its vast size and rusted brown roofs, a perfect place for a man to disappear. He settled in the Egbeda area, posing as a wealthy businessman who dealt in property and fish distribution. To his neighbors, he was a quiet, generous man who contributed to community development. They had no idea that the hand shaking theirs in the morning was the same hand that pulled the trigger on Black Sunday. But complacency is the enemy of survival, and even the most careful criminal makes a mistake. His mistake was maintaining contact with a specific associate that had already been compromised by the police. The phone lines were tapped, the signals were triangulated, and the ghost of Lagos was finally pinned to a grid coordinate. The police didn't just want an arrest, they wanted a takedown. They mobilized a heavily armed convoy, preparing for a war, because they knew Godogodo would never surrender without a fight. The date was July 31st, 2013, a night that would see the end of an era. The journey from Lagos to Ibadan was silent, the convoy of SARS operatives moving like a funeral procession for a man who was not yet dead. They arrived in Ibadan in the dead of night, navigating the quiet, sleeping streets of the Egbeda district. The intelligence was precise. The target was inside a sprawling bungalow, likely armed and likely awake. Godogodo was known to be an insomniac, a side effect of a life lived looking over one's shoulder. The tactical team surrounded the perimeter, cutting off all escape routes. The silence of the neighborhood was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Inside the house, Abiodun Egunjobi was resting, perhaps believing that he had once again outsmarted the system, that the distance between Lagos and Ibadan was enough to wash away his sins. He was wrong. The distance was merely a delay, not a pardon. At approximately 3:45 a.m., the peace of Egbeda was shattered. The police breached the compound. Unlike the chaotic shootouts of the movies, this was a calculated siege. But Godogodo, true to his reputation, was not a man to cower under a bed. Realizing he was cornered, he reportedly scrambled for his weapon, an AK-47 that was never far from his reach. The darkness of the room erupted in flashes of gunfire. It was a violent, desperate last stand of a man who knew that capture meant the end of everything he had built. However, the sheer volume of firepower from the tactical team was overwhelming. Bullets tore through the walls and windows, turning the sanctuary into a kill box. Godogodo was hit, not fatally, but enough to incapacitate him. The immortal charm he claimed to possess failed him when it mattered most. As the smoke cleared and the operatives stormed the room, they found the legend bleeding on the floor, surrounded by the tools of his trade, rifles, loaded magazines, and the terrifying reality of his violence. The journey back to Lagos was a victory lap for the police command. Godogodo, battered and defeated, was thrown into the back of a police van, a stark contrast to the luxury cars he was used to driving. The myth of his invincibility evaporated with every mile marker they passed. He was no longer the hunter, he was the trophy. As news of his arrest broke the next morning, social media and news outlets exploded. The one-eyed assassin had been caught. The relief in Lagos was palpable, especially among the police force. The man who had vowed to kill them was now in their custody, at their mercy. It was a triumph of persistence over power, a signal to the underworld that no matter how long the night lasts, the morning will eventually come. But for Godogodo, the morning brought only the harsh light of judgment and the inevitable consequences of a life spent destroying others. The parading of Abiodun Egunjobi at the Lagos State Police Command was a spectacle that drew journalists from every major media house in the country. He stood, or rather was supported, before the cameras, a shadow of the terrifying figure he once was. His body was riddled with bullet wounds from the arrest, his face swollen, his one good eye darting nervously around the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was not the booming roar of a warlord, but the quiet, resigned rasp of a defeated man. He confessed to everything, He detailed the bank robberies, the highway heists, and the chilling ease with which he killed police officers. "I have no count of how many policemen I killed," he admitted, a statement that sent shivers down the spines of everyone listening. He justified his actions with a twisted logic of revenge, claiming the police had brutalized him in his youth, so he brutalized them in return. But standing there in chains, that justification sounded hollow, a weak excuse for a decade of terror. He spoke of his wealth, the millions he had made and squandered, the houses he built that he would never live in again. He warned the younger generation, the Yahoo boys and aspiring gangsters who looked up to him, telling them that the life of crime was a trap. "I was rich, but I had no peace," he said. "I had money, but I couldn't enjoy it." This was the crux of his tragedy. He had accumulated vast resources, but lacked the freedom to spend a single naira without looking over his shoulder. His confession was a dismantling of the glamorous criminal lifestyle. He revealed the paranoia, the sleepless nights, the inability to trust friends or family, and the constant, gnawing fear of the day the door would be kicked down. He was the king of the underworld, but his kingdom was a prison long before he was ever put in a cell. The fall of Godogodo serves as a grim mirror to society, reflecting the dangerous intersection of poverty, police brutality, and personal choice. While his origin story of police harassment highlights deep systemic issues in Nigeria that need addressing, his reaction to become a mass murderer cannot be absolved. He chose to escalate the cycle of violence rather than break it. His legacy is not of Robin Hood-esque heroism, but of bloodshed and waste. He wasted his intelligence, his leadership skills, and his life. The police recovered his properties, his guns, and his money, leaving him with nothing but a legacy of infamy. The once feared Godogodo became a cautionary footnote in the history of Nigerian crime, proof that the long arm of the law may be slow, but it is infinite in its reach. And so, the reign of the one-eyed king came to an end. Abiodun Egunjobi's story is a powerful reminder that there is no shortcut to success that doesn't eventually lead to a dead end. He built a castle on a foundation of blood, and it was only a matter of time before it collapsed on top of him. Here is the take-home lesson. The allure of fast money is the biggest lie sold to the youth. Crime promises you the world, but it charges you your soul, your peace, and eventually your life. You might run for 10 years like Godogodo, you might run for 20, but you only have to be unlucky once. The law only has to be lucky once. True success is not just about having money, it's about having the peace of mind to enjoy it. Don't trade your freedom for a moment of shine. If you found this story captivating and want to hear more true-life stories about the rise and fall of Nigeria's most notorious figures, please do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. We put a lot of research into bringing you these scripts, retold with the detail and respect they deserve. By subscribing, you support the channel and ensure you never miss a new episode of our Crime Relief series.